All right, well, good afternoon, North Penn. Here we are, May 28th, and we have Todd and Jenna with me. I have Todd and Jenna with me today. And before we get into all of this, Todd and Jenna, first of all, how are you guys doing? How are things going in your households? Give me some thoughts just in a brief snippet here in your life these days.
So Kurt, Kurt, uh, it depends who you ask in my household, I guess I would say. So I can hear my wife in a faculty meeting on the other side of the wall. And she has been doing the lion's share of the distance learning with my kids. Once in a while, she comes in here and says, I need a pinch hitter. So she is doing an outstanding job and hanging in there. I am bogged down in meeting after meeting after meeting, but I do feel like we're all making a difference and doing the best that we can. So we're doing okay, all things considered. The Bowers are very fortunate, feeling good. Thank you.
Well, we've had our moments here. I've had, a couple memorable ones, like when my youngest dumped plaster of Paris down the sink when I was on a Google call. And so it's been interesting. I definitely never thought I would be live streaming to North Penn from my guest bedroom. So it's definitely been an interesting couple months.
Well, it certainly has, and we just thought it was important. And there are a lot of very serious things to talk about today, but we just thought it was important to get together and go online with our school community. So we have folks this afternoon at 2:30, and then we're going to have the community at 7 o'clock tonight. And certainly anyone watching at 2:30 is welcome to tune in again at 7 o'clock at night tonight. But we look forward to both of these opportunities. Bob Gilmer is going to help advance some slides here for us, and we're going to run through some things that we have planned, and then very importantly, we're going to take your questions and do our best to answer them. So we do have an agenda. We have objectives and goals, we have the reopening options, and we have the Q&A, and then we're going to talk about next steps. So how do we ask questions? Todd, you want to take this one?
I'll be happy to. So this afternoon, we are going to utilize email. So school reopening, different from the school closure email. So just simply send emails in. We have folks in the Office of School and Community Engagement kind of monitoring questions, throwing them into spreadsheets and working together. And then I believe Bob Gilmer will kind of pitch those to us once we get to the Q&A. So feel free to ask questions while we're presenting. Just know that we'll kind of hit on those questions at the end. So you're welcome to hold the questions or ask them as we're presenting.
All right. So as we look at the objectives here, we do want to provide a window into the thinking and the ideas that the administration, would be kicking around right now regarding the reopening of schools for 2020-21. Very importantly, we're looking to gather feedback, so that would help to inform our decisions as we develop the structures and the systems for the 2021 academic year. And we'd like to talk some more about, what students and staff would need upon return to school. So those would be the objectives we hope to achieve. We do have reopening guidelines, and I do want to emphasize that at this juncture, they are simply guidelines. They're not requirements. They're not a part of the health code. We do have things that are part of the health code, for example, when we have, cafeterias operating, they're part of code. And those things, we need to do absolutely, or it's a violation of code. In this case, we do have guidelines. So we're getting suggestions from various sources. Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, or CHOP, they put something out as of May 24th. You'll be able to access those if you haven't already seen those. The CDC has guidelines. I'm hearing we have weekly calls with Val Arkush, if at all possible. She's, of course, the county commissioner, Dr. Arkush, from Montgomery County. We were just on a call with her. Other superintendents and I were on that call. And she indicated that there'll be additional guidelines coming probably pretty soon from the state. So we continue to view those guidelines, but we understand they are guidelines, they're not code. That's an important distinction. So we have a long list here, and actually a couple slides of considerations. So we're going to try to run through those, and we'll be doing a lot of talking here, but this may generate questions from you. As I said earlier, right now we have guidelines, and those guidelines continue to evolve. And what we believe to be true when we went to distance learning back in March, we have now some new information, especially in the last 10 days coming from, studies now from the medical experts that they're learning more about this virus. We also have been told that we can expect that those medical reviews and things we're learning will change even more as time goes on. So we have to be very careful that we understand them to be what they are. It's what is known as of today, as of May 28th, and that continues to evolve. We are looking at a number of different aspects regarding school. One has to do with school entry. So, the number of students that are in close proximity when students arrive to school, and do we need to do any kind of staggered arrivals, because that is an opportunity for many students to, interact and to come within close proximity of one another. We're also looking at, taking temperatures or doing testing. On the call I was on today with Dr. Akush, she said there is a company in Montgomery County that is putting together testing. However, it is extremely expensive. It's like $100 a test, she said, right now. And if you wanted to do that for, every student every day, or every student and every employee every day, or every student and every employee every 5 days or 7 days or whatever, it would be extremely expensive. We're looking at the guidance on temperatures because, as the next bullet says, there are pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic individuals. So even though you might be taking temperatures, all that might be helpful for those that are symptomatic. You can clearly have people that are pre-symptomatic and they may be spreading the virus before they realize that they're sick. And likewise, they could be asymptomatic. So they're spreading it and they never really realized that they had the virus. So that's a big concern, and it does limit our ability then to have a lot of confidence in some of these measures, like temperature taking, for example. We also have, the matter of masks, and the guidance on masks continues to change. Initially, we were told that masks, didn't matter much at all. Then it became, an expectation that you would wear a mask and that you would be protecting others. You wouldn't necessarily be able to say that masks stop you or really do a whole lot of good in preventing you from getting the virus, but they would be helpful for people wearing masks before they come into close proximity of someone else, to have that mask on to protect others. That guidance continues to evolve too. So we're going to have to watch where that one goes. On today's call, as of May 28th, Dr. Akush changed direction and said that she's more inclined now to recommend the masks than she had been some time ago. We know that also comes with a lot of challenges. And Todd and Jenny, you may have some thoughts on, how do you get kids to, keep the masks on all the time? Or are there other ways that perhaps, in physical distancing measures in the next bullet there, that we might be able to relax, any requirements for masks because there are other measures in place? So you want to give some opinion on that regarding keeping kids wearing their masks and the age of kids wearing masks and compliance and that sort of thing?
Sure. So I think I was asked at one point by someone, do you really think that kindergarten students are going to keep their masks on all day? And the answer is no. I don't really think they're going to keep their masks on all day. So one of the things that we've been talking about is, are there portions of the day where there's more interaction that they could wear masks? And then are there others where they are seated 6 feet apart where that might not be necessary? So I think we're realistic in our response that it is a concern that small children certainly are not going to, tolerate that. Another concern is our students with disabilities who may have sensory needs, and that could really be something that, they're just pulling the masks off. So we're going to have to get really creative about that and think about, number of students, how far apart can we space them, and so on.
I've also heard the questions, Kurt, from some of the principals and teachers at the secondary level. What about kids who refuse to wear masks? That will pose another challenge. I think I saw on this list somewhere, maybe it's further down on the first column there, but what about sneeze guards? Is that a better alternative? And I've heard you speak often about what's the hierarchy or priority here. Is it the 6 feet? Is it the mask? Is it the sneeze guard? Is it hand sanitizer, wiping down surfaces all the time? And again, that target seems to move. But I agree with Dr. Rufo in, I have a 7-year-old in my household who I have no confidence in him being able to keep a mask on. But then I have a 10-year-old who absolutely would do what she's told. So it's all over the place, and it will absolutely be a challenge.
And I think the other aspect of masks that we have to be realistic about is not only will it be difficult to enforce, and I think we're going to have to be very upfront with our community and say, folks, these are the expectations, but the reality might be different. And I think parents recognize that. And I saw a recent poll that I think was done nationwide, and parents did recognize that. They would tell their own children, wear the mask if asked to do so. However, they would recognize that it's probably unlikely that their children would always be compliant. Another complicating factor with the masks is with teachers trying to teach while wearing a mask. We know that that will be difficult. And there are some, times when it's very important for the child to see the teacher's face, the teacher's mouth, the teacher's lips, the teacher's, making sounds if they're teaching, phonemic awareness and things like that. So I think that's going to be another reality thing is, what is realistic in terms of a teacher wearing a mask at all times. Nevertheless, at the moment, there is some, guidance on this saying that there's a lot of value in masks from spreading it. Some of the more recent research indicates that once the virus particles are, expelled into the air, that they remain in the air anywhere from 6 to 8 minutes is what one study showed, and we'll see what some of these other studies say. But the virus getting into the air and being in the air is a major concern. Then we get into class changes in the hallways. We have to recognize that we could perhaps put some measures in place to have one direction, that sort of thing. That's some of the guidance we're reading. But again, that will be an opportunity there for a lot of students to be interacting, especially at the secondary schools when you have a mass changing. And perhaps there's some way that we could, jiggle some schedules with our middle schools and perhaps not have all of the grades change in class at the same time. I know our principals are talking about that. Maybe there's a way that we could, accommodate, some things to be able to reduce the number of students in a hallway at one time. The airflow within the building is another important consideration. It was something that was discussed today with the other superintendents and Dr. Akush. There's a lot of research that seems to indicate that, it gets into the air system, and if, air is circulated from, one part of the building to another, which, many air systems in office buildings and schools do, it can be spread, through the air as it's being circulated within a particular building. So that's going to be another challenging reality that I think people have to recognize and, understand that that's another way that the virus can be spread. We have a positive person who, expels virus particles into the air, and then that's, sent around the building. Dr. Akush did say, any opportunity to keep, windows open, that's not even possible in some of our buildings. Or to, have class outside, well, that could get interesting. But, these are ideas that some people are kicking around because air can circulate within a building. And Todd talked about the sneeze guards, and we do have some folks from the facilities department looking at the possibility of creating some sneeze guards. We do know that, there could be some difficulty getting plexiglass. And how realistic is it to have a barrier? Where could those barriers be? Are we talking about a barrier at student desks? Are we talking about barriers, in the cafeteria on tables so that students could still be seated across from each other? I just recently heard that it could be very problematic for safety purposes to have any kind of a plexiglass barrier on a bus. So it doesn't seem like that's going to be possible. But that's something that we are looking at now to see if there's even any possibility or merit in trying to invest money into sneeze guards or barriers. Likewise, in our office settings, we're looking at that and seeing is there, any merit in trying to explore barriers within office settings where perhaps some secretaries might be seated fairly close to each other. The last bullet in that column on cleaning and disinfecting, frequency of desks, doorknobs, and then the availability of products, a big item, an item I'm very concerned about. We are having extreme difficulty on May 28th getting vendors to commit to providing product for us. We still have product in inventory, so it's not like we're out of product. but we're very concerned about, the ability to procure products. We're looking at all sorts of different ways to do that. Can we get, the county to participate with us to help us to acquire products? Can we get, some priority put on schools as far as availability of products? But that's a major concern. The other item there on cleaning, again, another concern. It was shared with us today that, the preference or the recommendation would be to have a space cleaned by a student if they're changing classes before the next student sits at that desk. And, can we do that? And how well can we adhere to that? Do we have the necessary cleaning products for the students to clean their own particular desk before they leave so that when the next student comes in, that desk has been cleaned? We know it is certainly impossible to have custodial staff there to clean every desk at, every change of classes. So that's another consideration. It does depend somewhat, I think, even on the availability of products, let alone the cooperation of our students. So that's the first column. Before I move to the second column, I'm going to get a drink of water here. And Todd and Jen, if there's anything I missed out of that first column that you, the three of us, or Camet, we were talking about, certainly you can supplement. I'll get a drink of water here.
I think you covered it well. I mean, it's overwhelming, right? Everyone, I'm sure, has the same feeling that we do. You look at this list and it's how in the world. And by the way, there's 2 more slides coming. So right. I think it's the consensus among folks that we've been meeting with is we're going to try our best. So it's just important to get the big picture here and see all these concerns or challenges.
Exactly. So the next column there in hand washing. A lot of the guidance is pretty clear that they really encourage hand washing. I think our instructional staff needs to think about, how they might build that into the day with frequent hand washing. Are there hand washing facilities within it? For example, an elementary classroom, that would be true in some cases, in other cases not. Of course, secondary schools. What are the hand washing capabilities that we have? Can we put some protocols in place? And, I read one thing that said we ought to insist upon hand washing when students arrive, just to make sure that their hands have been washed, and then they go into their classroom. But I think we need to look at that and have some protocols in place to be able to have frequent hand washing, because that is one strategy that is really being pushed, strongly. Looks like we have a double there. We'll clean that up for tonight. We have that bulleted item below there. Kind of connected, though, to the hand washing is the availability of hand sanitizers. And Tom Schneider and I have been having a lot of discussions about, what we can do. We know right now we cannot acquire additional stock of Purell. Purell is not available to schools right now. And the dispensers that we do have only accept Purell packets that, go in there. So we're trying to see, is there another dispenser that we might be able to acquire that is more of a generic dispenser, and we would be able to use products from different vendors. The matter of school buses, a big challenge for us, and we just don't see how we're going to be able to have students, for example, 6 feet apart, and it's going to be really challenging. So I think we're going to have to lay out what we are able to do to our parents, and then they'll have to make a decision if they're okay with that, or if they say they'd rather drive their children to school because they're just not comfortable with the way we're going to be able to do buses. Social and emotional support of students and staff, a major concern. And Jenny, you can talk a little bit about some of the meetings we've had where we've asked our fellow administrators about concerns that they have for the startup of school, especially in the area of social and emotional support.
Sure. So one of the things that we've discussed, and a number of our staff on the call today, I believe, are also part of these conversations when we met with Night Shift and with our department chairs, is that it's going to be a big transition for everyone coming back. So for our students who have been out of school for 6+ months, we can't really expect that we're just going to kind of slide back into business as usual. So we've been talking a lot about a transition period and what that looks like. At the same time, we want to be mindful that while some students will need a lot of additional support with reteaching of behaviors and expectations, we will have other students who are ready to go and who are going to come in, and we don't want to hold them back either. So it's a fine balance. And one of the things that I'll speak about a little bit later is we are putting together working groups for these different areas where we can develop really solid plans. And there is a social and emotional working group for both elementary and secondary that will be looking at just these things.
And we're not only concerned about our students, we are also concerned about our staff. So it's very important that if you're having some issues or just overwhelmed, and that is very understandable, that you're getting the necessary help, that you're reaching out to people, because we do care and we want you to understand that we're here to support you. Regarding school calendar, at the present time, we're not looking at an adjustment to begin school earlier, but you need to know that it is a consideration that some districts are. So I wouldn't say absolutely no way, but there are places that are talking about starting up a little bit sooner and then expecting to be shut down for a while, or perhaps having longer breaks during the height of the typical cold and flu season. So keep that in mind right now. Staggered schedules, again, another thought that we're kicking around, and we're going to be trying to gauge the interest of our community and some options we're going to get to in just a few minutes there. So keep that one in the back of your mind. Also, online learning. We know that we're very appreciative of what everyone did regarding online learning, but we have a few more thoughts on that we're going to share later in this presentation. The very, very important staff training and collaboration. I'm very grateful to what everyone did to come together to put up the product we were able to put up. I saw and heard of a lot of collaboration among staff members, so that was huge, and we appreciate that very much. And we're going to need to continue to have that. The toll on the families is something I think that we have to acknowledge. It's difficult for families, particularly difficult for some of the families that, perhaps there's stressors either with finances or stressors where some folks are continuing to try to work and still manage, their children online. So there's a significant toll on families. We also have to understand that we've gotten quite a few communications about the social and emotional health of our children that might be in really difficult situations where mom and dad are bickering, and it's just not good, and they're stuck there. So we need to be very mindful of that. The importance of social interaction for our students can't be overstated, and we know that a school does provide a very important role in that, and the isolation that some students are feeling right now is a bit concerning. And as Todd said, we have some more slides here. So other things that we have guidance, and we're getting guidance on, and we're really getting a lot of emails these days from a lot of different organizations about things to consider when restarting school. But the number of students a teacher sees is an important consideration. And I put in there, for example, special content area teachers. Let's say at the elementary school, you might have a special content area teacher who sees every child in that building within 4 days. So if there are pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic individuals there, and you do contact tracing, that could be really concerning, where suddenly you realize, yes, that individual actually saw, virtually all of the children in the building. Likewise, at our secondary schools, at our middle schools, for example, we do have minors that, teachers can see a lot of children in a short amount of time. And then block scheduling. I know our middle school principals in particular are talking about, is this an opportune time to try to reduce the number of interactions that would happen so that the teacher wouldn't, be in contact with nearly as many students if we were on a block? Would the teacher have some advantage to get to know the children better in the event that we're racing against the clock when we do come back, in the concern that we would have another wave and be put back out again? So that's a consideration that's happening. I just want you to kind of know about that and plant the seed with you. The next bullet is very important, and that is regarding the ability of a student to transition if they are in the in-person instruction and then they get quarantined, or if they choose one of those hybrid options that you're going to hear about in a couple minutes. What can we do to help students so that if they do get quarantined, they can perhaps continue to get instruction? And are there possibilities where we could be doing live streaming? Setting up a camera. It wouldn't be perfect, but maybe, setting up a camera somewhere in the classroom off of a laptop, for example, to be able to do live streaming to families that either are choosing a hybrid option or are, in a quarantine situation. So more to come on that. That whole ability to transition from in-person to online if school gets closed is important consideration. We're talking about, is it the right time to put in place a learning management system or LMS, where, teachers could put a lot of their material that they're creating, share it with one another more easily, share it with their students more easily. We did have conversations with another school district in the state that is much farther along with their learning management system and their ability to transition to online, because they do access much of the material that's in those courses housed, in, for example, Canvas or Schoology or, one of those platforms. And Todd and Jen, if you have any thoughts on any of those bullets, I'm going to get another drink of water here.
Go ahead, Jenna. You got this transition.
Well, it looks like lunches and recess are coming up, and I know particularly at the elementary level, that's a concern. So we're definitely exploring all kinds of options of, do we put dividers in the cafeteria, or are students eating in their classrooms? And if we have students eating in the classrooms, then who is monitoring them? So not that we have any concrete answers, but I think, as with anything that we're discussing today, pretty much anything is on the table. And we are really just looking to think as creatively as we can and come up with different solutions, whether we're in person, whether we're hybrid, whether we're virtual. And so that is something that we're just really trying to put out there. What could we possibly do, and what are the multiple ways to go at this, and then finding the best solution.
Very well said. Everything is being put on the table right now as a possibility, and we're looking for feedback. We don't have it all figured out yet today on May 28th, but we thought we could, help to, give this window into our thinking, the things we're considering, so that you could, help inform our thinking. So if you think, that would be wonderful or that would be terrible, or perhaps somewhere in between, but, send us some feedback on these different items. And there'll be things that you will think of that we will say, we never thought of that. That's, good point. So thank you for that. So just a couple other things before we go back to that, Bob. I don't think I quite said the last thing there on the reality of we're going to have to reduce the furniture in the classrooms, and we're going to try to spread them apart. So continue to think about that. If you have a lot of other furniture, tables, kidney tables, small group spaces, we love those, in other years, but in this particular year, those might not be a reality. Also, that we have some really fixed stations, and we're very cognizant of that. All right, Bob, if you could advance to the next one. So assemblies, athletics, we're looking for guidance from PIAA on that, extracurriculars, all the things on that list, extremely important. We don't have a whole lot to be able to report on that now, but we want to let you know they are on our radar. Next slide. There we go. Todd, you want to take the next couple?
Yes, and as you mentioned at the top of the show, Kurt, very serious conversation, and some of it is just very concerning. I thought I'd add a little bit of humor. I'm looking through the questions and the emails that I'm receiving, and one individual wrote me, "Dear Todd, the biggest question that is coming out of the meeting and that I am hearing amongst my peers is, who is cutting your hair?" So if we can't smile about that, the answer is I'm not breaking social distancing guidelines. I'm cutting my own hair. Thank you. So, all right. On May, I believe it was the week of May 4th, we put out a survey in collaboration with Hanover called the Pulse Survey to students and parents, asking them, how are we doing? What are you seeing? What is going well? How are we supporting your needs, and needs well beyond academic? And while there's a slide a couple in advance that kind of brings out themes, let me start with the fact that it is very, very clear that everyone is doing a great job and everyone is doing the best that they can. I had a teacher in a meeting the other day that say, essentially the doors were shut on us on March 12th. And we're pretty proud of what we've done thus far, given that challenge. And I couldn't agree more. I'm wowed every day. I've actually used some first grade lessons with my first grader that I've seen in North Penn. and my fourth grader, because it's just so outstanding. So we are very proud of the job that everyone's doing top to bottom and the support that everyone's giving to students. So here are some, if you want to use the phrases glows and grows, here are some things to celebrate. You can see here, it was a Likert scale survey. And if you're noticing, the mathletes in the group might be seeing that 84, 10, and 1 do not add up to 100. So the 84 is those who chose an option above neutral. The 10% is they chose below neutral or negative. And then actually the 1% was the folks who said, I don't know. So just so you understand kind of why you're not seeing it add up to 100%. But there's a lot of blue there. So very positive responses about what folks are seeing at home. And of course, this list is not all inclusive. Mr. Gilmer, if you could give us the next slide. And the concerns, and most of this was in relation to access to resources. So there are some things here that relate to resources supporting children and families, but you'll see here people are concerned. They're concerned about their students. They're concerned about social interaction. Kurt just hit on mental health and support for kids. And Jenna talked about how there's going to be increased need among everyone, and not just the students, of course. We all need support, and these are challenging times for all of us, and the isolation is hard. So you'll notice that here you're seeing, and again, almost all of these are 50% or above in terms of positive response. And our data analysts did a good job of taking the Likert scales and kind of saying, okay, where on that Likert scale, is that a positive or a negative? If it's extremely useful, for example, or no, that's not useful at all. So the responses here, the color coding, are a positive response for, I guess you could say, for the district versus not.
Yeah,
So,
this does a great job of taking, looking at it quickly and seeing it directly, the positivity, or, flip the negativity if it is a major concern, and then, the neutral being gray in the middle there. So I appreciate being able to see this, clearly like that. I think it was instructive to us. So I appreciate everyone that completed the Pulse survey, and I think it helped us a lot as we try to, plan for September.
Just to best provide context there, we had close to 4,000 participants, 2/3 of which were parents, and then the other third were students. And we sent it to students grades 6 through 12, but parents K through 12. So just, again, this is a snapshot. We're planning to actually present the whole survey and the results publicly, I think, on the 16th, I believe. Mr. Gilmer, could you advance? So here are some of the
open-ended responses. Then we had many people who typed in the text box that was available. This was done by Hanover, so they do limit the size of the text box in terms of how much space you have. So people did take advantage of that opportunity, and again, very overall very positive, very appreciative, very understanding that this was a challenge and we had to put this up very quickly. That said, they do say that if distance learning continues, they would like to have more teacher face-to-face, more what we call synchronous opportunities. We understand that if we're going to be doing that, we'd have to put some real structure in place to set that expectation that if you choose that option, and we're going to get to that in a minute, that the expectation would be you would in fact be on. Otherwise, you're absent. You're absent from quote school that day, or you're cutting class, whatever it might be. And there were clearly concerns about student and staff well-being. So I think this COVID has certainly brought that out in many people with a lot of concern for one another. All right, Bob? So Jen, you want to talk a little bit about the in-person instruction?
Sure. So one of the things that we've realized is we have to be prepared for whatever scenario presents us in the fall. So the next several slides, we'll be talking about in-person instruction, some considerations that we might have for that, if we are virtual or if we go with a hybrid. And I think that we all recognize, and we've already had some parents reach out and say, you know what, even if you're in person, I'm not sending my kids. So we want to make sure that we have solid plans for either a hybrid or a distance learning continuation, just because we don't want to see students lost to cyber charters or other schools. We also, as I mentioned earlier, started developing working groups. And the way that that worked was we have probably close to 25 to 30 different topics, from health and safety to cleaning to social distancing, academics, special ed, really everything under the sun. And those groups are going to be looking at these three areas: in-person, distance learning, and hybrid, for each of those topics. So that's kind of where our thinking is at. For in-person instruction, if we are able to open in the fall, obviously we will need to really look at those guidelines and make sure that we have social distancing, and also the possibility that perhaps that will open and there could be an outbreak, and then we have an intermittent shutdown, which again is why it's really important that we have options for each of these three scenarios. For in-person instruction, we're looking at the possibilities of how could we have all students every day. And one of the things that we will be sending out to families is a survey, just to get their thinking, because if we have a percentage of families that say, you know what, I'm not sending my kids, that makes it a little easier for us in terms of how we're sectioning and scheduling students. Also looking at alternating groups. So maybe we would have one group on Monday, another group on Tuesday, or would we do it by weeks, 1 week in, 1 week out? One of the things we really want to be mindful of in that situation is just the scheduling impact on families of young children, which could be challenging for them. Also looking at partial days. So maybe we have one segment that comes in the AM, another in PM, and then they're supplemented with online.
Yeah, this is extremely challenging to us. And, you know, as I'm on calls with other superintendents and with other leaders, whether that be legislators or, you know, health experts or, you know, other, you know, leader types, you know, within our community, they're really emphasizing the importance of being able to properly educate our children. And at the same time, they're emphasizing the need to be able to have mom and dad, if they typically do work outside of the home, to be able to get back to work, you know, to get food on the table, to get the economy going again. You know, all of those kinds of things are, you know, clearly enter into the discussion. So we're going to try our best to be able to accommodate those who do want to send their children to school every day. And we recognize, as Jenna mentioned, that there are some that would say, until there's a vaccine, I'm not sending my child. And we, you know, respect that. We would like to program for those. So we have some slides about that in just a minute. But if it should come to pass that we have to do alternative, you know, or alternating groups, like an A day, a B day, or a week in, a week out, or partial days, you know, morning and afternoon. Again, I think that would be very, very complicated and difficult for everybody, for our teachers, for our children, and for our families. But there are districts that are talking about that. So, you know, it is on the list, and I'm not ruling it out. But our goal, if possible, would be, what can we do to have those who choose to send their children to school, understanding that these are the parameters that you're going to have to understand will be in place. And if you say, no, thank you, we won't take offense to that. Then please enroll in North Penn's virtual option. So let's move ahead to the next slide.
So in terms of online learning, we are envisioning, unlike what we did with our distance learning since March 12th, we would actually have some options for families. One thing that we clearly heard from you, our staff, and from some parents is that it's challenged to get students to log in even when you did try live instruction. So we would like folks, we're envisioning a scenario where you are choosing to learn synchronously or to stick with an asynchronous schedule. Some families, Kurt referenced the open-ended responses earlier, and some families put in their response, this is working great for my child, he's thriving, he's doing it in the evenings, he's going to work. So some families may choose to stick with asynchronous and do their learning on their own, watch videos, answer questions. But others, and I know I've heard from many of you, that it is just a challenge. And even when I hold these sessions, 2 of my 28 students come. So students, we would ask that students opt in. And then there's a bell schedule, a legitimate bell schedule, like a typical brick and mortar environment, where they have to log in at a specific time, and failing to do so would result in an absence or a class cut. So this will include some asynchronous components as well. It's not going to be entirely online, but there will be expectations for live instruction. Important to note that in the asynchronous world, kids would still have availability and options to communicate with their teacher, but it wouldn't have to be at the same time every day and with a bell schedule. And we're also aware, and in 2 slides, I think we get to it, that some of these options are going to work better for some of our staff than others as well. Kurt, anything to add here before we move on?
Yeah, I think you misspoke just one little. It would be entirely online, I believe, but it wouldn't be entirely always at the same time when you are logged on with your teacher.
Correct.
Right. Yeah.
If I didn't say that, then I did misspeak.
Right. Yeah. But then we did think about a hybrid, right? So Todd, you want to talk a little, or Jenna, whichever one of you two want to talk about that one?
This one's Jenna.
All right. So in a hybrid, it's just like what it sounds, combination of in-person and online. So in that scenario, we would have students in the building maybe once or twice a week, and then the rest of their education is completed online and at home. It would provide some opportunity for the in-person and some socialization, but it would also be helpful to us because we wouldn't necessarily have as many students in the building at one time. There are other downfalls as well because, we'll still have teachers that are seeing lots of kids. So I think all of these choices, there are pros and cons.
Absolutely. All of them come with, an upside and a downside. So none of them are clear cut. Hey, this is definitely, the cat's meow. This could be hard. But we know that, that we need to put these things out there, at least now, May 28th, and see if there's some energy that starts to coalesce around, any of these options or approaches, or if we continue to offer all of those and see what we can do to do it. But it gets complicated because of staffing. And I think that might be our next slide. So how do we staff these? And it's a chicken and the egg. Like if I know how many you're going to want, the different options, I'll have a better idea how to be able to staff it. So if pick a number, 50% of our families say, until there's a vaccine, I'm not sending my child. Okay, then I know that. Then we know that we have 50% of the children coming to school, and we can appropriately staff for that. And then we can have teachers available to teach the online versions of our classes. But again, to being able to get people to commit, and this is going to be hard because I think many parents are feeling a bit overwhelmed right now. They read, different things in different days. They wake up to a headline that is, maybe more comforting, and then they wake up to a headline the next day that is more concerning. This will be challenging, but, we do need to figure out where the energy is among our parents and our students for the various options, and then how can we staff those? And likewise, where is the energy for the staff? So are there staff members who say, you know what, until there's a vaccine, I just don't think I can't do this. I don't want to do it. I'm too high risk, or I have family members that are too high risk. We need to know that. And then how are we going to deal with that information? Is it, those folks, go to the front of the line because they say, well, I can do online. Or do we say it's seniority, or how do we figure that out? And what's involved with online? What are the expectations? If somebody says, I'm kind of on the fence, I guess I could do either one, but tell me more about what you would expect from me if I do online. We want to be able to lay that out clearly also, so people could, make an informed choice or an informed request if that is possible. Again, not sure that that's possible. Don't want to make a lot of promises here because we'll have to see how this all plays out. But perhaps that could be a possibility where we will be able to gauge, the interest of the individual. Otherwise, it'll be that's the way you're assigned and that's the way it'll be. So we're very sensitive to all of this, and we're going to try to do our best. All right, next slide. So I gather we're getting questions at school reopening.
Yeah, and keep in mind that this email address is now open. So if you're not asking questions now, or you think of something at a later date or time, send in your questions. We'll continue to monitor and try to work with everyone.
So before we go to those questions, I'll give you a little chance here to start to type them in if you haven't yet. The next slide in this does talk about the next steps. So what are the next steps? Well, we're going to review the input that we received today through the Google form. And that'll become live if it isn't already live. It'll become live by the end of this presentation. And then, take that, continue to work with our administration We're going to determine how many students and staff will not be returning in person under any scenario until a vaccine is developed, if we possibly can. I think if parents know that now, that'll be helpful. Eventually, we're going to have to establish a deadline by which parents must commit to an available option. So I don't know when that is yet. I think we'll have to eventually set that deadline. We'll have to tell them that, look, you have to make a decision because we have to staff accordingly. There'll be resistance from that, I'm sure, because people still want to wait till the last second because they watch all of this evolve. But nevertheless, we're going to have to establish a deadline, and then we'll communicate these decisions as soon as we can. So, Bob, do you have some questions ready for us?
I do, and we've had a great response. I would say, just kind of looking at it, well over 100 questions and comments so far. So the staff have been engaged the whole time as you guys have been presenting. So just kind of looking at the spreadsheet here, one of the questions that came up, and I know, Kurt, you've been talking to the county and other superintendents and even at the state level, when it comes to reopening or what we will be allowed to do in the guidelines, has there been any talk of, will that be a county decision of what schools will do? Or would it be similar to like a school closure that generally we allow schools to close because there's snow? Is it going to be a school-based decision where if for some reason maybe we have, there's a little bit of an outbreak at a school, or somebody's ill, is that a school decision, a county decision, or even how we open? Is it a county, state, or is it our North Penn decision of how we open?
And that's a great question. It was actually a question that we were discussing today on the superintendent's call, because we need to get that from PDE, and we're told that by next week sometime we should expect to hear more from PDE. I totally understand that PDE has been overwhelmed with the diversity within our state, and that there are differences in Montgomery County versus other counties, and you can see that with who's in the different colors at different times. Their ability to provide online varies across the entire state, but we're trying to get that from the state. Can you tell us, will you give us the latitude to make the determination? Will it be on a county by county basis? Because they did shut down the entire county back there on, I think it was the 12th of March. Are they going to do that again, or will it continue to be, or will it be more of a matter of, school district by school district? So the answer to that is they haven't told us, and we're looking for that answer.
All right, very good. I'm going to direct this one towards Jenna. Of course, everybody can jump in. Any thoughts or plans on what special education classrooms, the question here specifically is about AS classrooms, what will they look like? So what will those rooms look like when we come back?
Yeah, so I think our self-contained classes like autistic support, generally, while they already have a smaller ratio of students, so autistic support, for example, has no more than 8, there are quite a good deal of number of staff members that are assigned to those rooms. And there are also students who might exhibit behaviors or need assistance with things like self-care. So that's something that we really, and like I had referenced earlier, we do have a team that's specifically looking at just this topic. But we're really going to have to think about that. And I think we're going to have some very honest and candid conversations as part of IEP team decisions as well. And for families to talk about, okay, if your student isn't able to keep a mask on, number one, how will we protect staff? So that's something that we'll have to think about because the child still is entitled to receive the education. But then maybe if families might realize that this isn't the option for me, and are there other ways that we can creatively do this through, home live streaming, contracted providers doing more one-on-one support with students. So there's not an easy answer to that because it's so highly individualized. I think one thing that we do realize for our students with disabilities and for all students is that if we do need to move to more of an online situation, looking at how we can provide some of those direct services more virtually to make sure that our kids aren't losing skills. So in person, the conversation really looks like, how do we keep our staff safe? And then if we have real serious concerns about that, then that's something that the IEP team has to discuss.
And I think that's all answered in that question. There were two other questions I was going to direct towards you. Had to deal with directly that the personal care aspects and what that would look like, or the guidance. And I think you've answered that. I don't know if you want to add to that, but I want to make sure that the question is put out there.
Sure, and I did see something on the sheet as well about students who have more medical needs or multiple disabilities and need assistance with feeding. That's also a discussion. Many of those students do have some compromised immune systems and health needs, so we're not really sure whether that will be in their best interest to return, and that's something that we're going to have to talk through with families, and the families are going to need to understand, given the limitations, is this something that you feel safely doing, returning your child to school? We already have had a couple who have said, you know what, because of my child's limitations and health concerns, I'm just keeping them home until this is all taken care of. So there'll be some families that elect not to send them back also.
Thanks. Kurt, one of the questions that kind of came up is, will family, staff, any discussion on, if we have to self-identify and say, hey, I've tested positive for COVID-19, are the responsibilities or the requirements by the county at any level of having to have to self-report that, so I can tell you that, hey, I've been sick, so I might have exposed, or if I just call myself out sick and don't tell anybody that I have COVID-19, any discussion on the requirements that the state or the county's talking about?
Yeah, same as my earlier answer, and that is something else that we put out there saying, you need to tell us. If it's the Montgomery County Department of Health or if it's the Pennsylvania Department of Health, but you need to tell us, what it is that we shall do in these situations, including the reporting, the contact tracing, self-reporting, all of that. So we're looking for very definitive guidance from the Department of Health on that. Very good. So I'm trying to group them as best I can together. So if it feels a little random, bear with me, because the questions are coming in as we go. Todd, I'm going to direct this one to you, and thinking about, the large hall passing pod clog at the high school. What we'll be able to do to provide social distancing when we have the number of students changing classes, and our thoughts of what we might be able to do there, given either reduced class size or not, we still have to move people through the building from time to time. What are some of the thoughts on what we're looking at there?
Right. So I think I'll start with right from the beginning. And some of that is the impetus behind these meetings today, right? Understanding what's the situation with our staff? What's the situation with students? How many students will we have? And while we won't have a concrete number today or tomorrow, it'll be helpful to hear from our staff and our families, just kind of get a pulse. Sorry to use that word again. But once we have that, then we'll have to take a look. Does block scheduling make sense? When you only have 4 periods a day, then kids are only changing classes 3 times. So now, yes, there's going to be, let's say 2,000 kids are at the high school. There's going to be kids in the hallway passing from class, but maybe we can create a schedule where there's just a minute or 2 apart from certain sections of the building, and that kind of limits things. So again, it's hard to kind of work in a world of hypotheticals right now, and that's why we're trying to get as much information as we can out there now to help inform our decisions moving forward.
Great. Kurt, as far as, talking to other superintendents and looking at some of the guidance, are we looking at or considering like only bringing in K through 6 to go to school from the aspect of the need to have childcare for working parents, and then leaving 7-12 online, or some mixture thereof, where maybe we're using the high school if the high school students aren't at school there? I don't know if you've seen anything or other guidance where people are saying, we're going to use this massive building we have and then keep older students who can be home alone out of school, and then maybe use that for elementary, or any discussions of rethinking our building structure from what grades are where?
Yes, Bob, those are things that, we've kicked around, initially. I wouldn't say that we're headed that way in North Penn. It's complicated. There are other districts that are talking about that, but one comes to mind where they only have 1 elementary, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. So for them to utilize their high school as the quote elementary school and not bring the high schoolers in, that does provide additional classrooms for them. But then they're vexed with, how do we staff it? Because if we spread kids out, the kids need to have teachers. So, if you're going to try to reduce the class sizes and spread students out more in an individual classroom by using a building that has more classrooms, you still need to be able to staff it. So that's a challenge that they haven't yet figured out either. But for North Penn, given that we have 13 elementary schools, it would be extremely challenging for us to be able to, do that effectively. So I don't see that one as very high. I won't say absolutely no way. It's May 28th. We may rethink that. But for now, we're thinking not doing it that way in North Penn, given our size.
Great. This one is, Jen, I'll ask you to jump in on this. And of course, anybody can jump in on any answer at any time. A question from one of our nurses about like the nurses suite and what measures we're thinking about to protect our nursing staff when we're back to school, our thoughts of, we identify a kid who has a fever or something else, that they're ill. What are we thinking about from those that are going to be closest to somebody that might be ill, because we realize that and we bring them to the nurses suite? So what kind of pieces are we putting in place, or what are we talking about to address some of those issues?
Sure. Well, I just want to begin by saying that, having worked closely with the nursing staff at North Penn in the past, it is a top-notch department. And since we have had this pandemic, Karen Skillman, Marisa Green, and our cabinet, they are the nursing department chairs, have really been in close communication. So we've been talking quite a bit. They're attending meetings at state and county levels, bringing that information back to us. Some of the things that we have discussed includes sick and well rooms. So similar to when you go to a doctor's office, separating students who are sick versus students who are well. Looking at additional partitions and personal protective equipment. As and Kurt had referenced earlier, that's a concern how we're going to get our hands on all of that. But that's something that is important, and that's also goes into all of our considerations, the availability of this. So we might have this amazing plan to reopen school, but there's no hand sanitizer, or there's a shortage of certain things that prevent us from doing that. So we're really doing our best to put that plan in place, but recognizing that there will be certain limitations that we might have to shift gears. But just we're continuing to have that communication. Kurt also meets with Val Arkush, the county health commissioner, regularly, and we are in communication with the Montgomery County Office of Public Health. So we're working with them to ensure that we can put those guidance in place.
Okay, and the another question here, as far as eating in the classroom or in the cafeteria, we deal with food allergies and student allergies, those types of considerations. I'm not sure we have the answer to handle that, but what would we say about dealing with all of the same issues we have all the time with food allergies and peanut-free classrooms and those types of things, of how we handle in-classroom eating compared to the cafeteria, and how's that still the same if we're in the CAF or not?
I can take that one too, because we have had a number of students who have some very severe allergies that we have had to put different guidelines in place in their classrooms. So for example, there's a safe snack lists, and parents know that this is what you can send in or you can't send in. We have in those certain classrooms a student that I can think off the top of my head who every kid uses a certain kind of wipe on their hands when they enter the room. So I'm not overly concerned about that, just because we have had precautions that we've had to put in place already. So we would just need to implement that on a larger scale.
And I do want to have a shout out to Melissa Forlick and the school nutrition services staff. Oh man, we're like over 100,000 meals already like a week or two ago. It's just been phenomenal. So they have had tremendous response. We're very, very appreciative. People that didn't miss a beat, kept on coming to work, preparing the meals, distributing the meals. Just been phenomenal what the school nutrition services staff has done.
So next question is about the required school days or hours. Has there been any changes or guidance from the states? So we obviously want people to stay home, right? And if they're unsure, we want them to stay home. So what if they reach up to that attendance level where all of a sudden we have to make a phone call that you're out too much? So any guidance from the state on how we're looking at at the days for attendance as well as the school year, that if we're open, close, is there going to be some flexibility there in the school year and how we acknowledge attendance?
So I'll take that one. Again, another topic on today's call was on the call, the topic on the call actually for the last couple weeks. Admittedly, we're getting a little frustrated as superintendents because we are asking for Harrisburg to give us that guidance on what they call them flexible instructional days. So presently, the law says you can have up to 5 flexible instructional days. That law was passed recently to deal with, when I say recently, you could have invoked that already this school year that we're just finishing now. So it was about a year ago it got passed. We only had a very short window of time to put together a plan that would, meet the satisfaction of Harrisburg, and most of us didn't put that in place for the 2019-20 school year. Then everything flew apart in March, and they said, okay, all that's not necessary. You can have all the flexible instructional days you want for the remainder of the year. However, we have gotten nothing regarding 2020-21 regarding flexible instructional days. So we are clamoring for Harrisburg, and PDE told us recently that that requires a legislative intervention. So I'm on calls. We have school board members on calls with our legislators on a weekly basis, and that's something we're going to push our local legislators to deal with. We need to have the flexible instructional days expanded beyond the current guideline, and it's actually law of 5 days, and let there be unlimited so that we can put a plan together. That's the other aspect of this, is we're looking for guidance. Are we going to have to submit a plan to PDE that gets reviewed and approved, or are they going to say do what you can and you're on your own? So we're not sure. We were given a lot of latitude in March because they could not respond quickly enough. And now we're asking the question, is that going to be the same? Or are you expecting us to submit plans? If so, can you tell us what you want in those plans? And then we can tell you whether or not, we can do it and how we can do it.
We're about the 3:30 mark. We said we'd do this for about an hour, so being mindful of everybody's time, everybody watching out there. Obviously, we're going to take a few more questions here, but of course, I want everybody to know that we have every single question and comment that has come through the school reopening email. It's in our spreadsheet. We're collating as we speak. So if we didn't get to a direct question here, it's in our spreadsheet. But I kind of wanted to direct just a couple questions here. Or the first question here is, about our facilities pieces of it, where there's a question here about like hand washing is like the number one thing. Just wash your hands, right? So of making sure that sometimes in many of our bathrooms we not have any hot water. Are those types of things where it didn't matter that we didn't really have hot water before in the bathrooms? Are there things like that we're looking at from a facility standpoint, besides additional sanitation stations wherever we can? What other facility considerations we're looking at?
Yeah, the answer to that is absolutely yes. The other thing that came out of today's discussion, and that was they're now saying disable your air dryers, your air hand dryers, because there's research that indicates that if a person is positive and they use that to dry their hands, that might be creating all kinds of virus distribution within the restroom. There are other concerns about restrooms generally that are major concerns. So yes, the answer to that is we will do what we can regard to that, and make the restrooms as safe as possible. But that whole hand washing thing is huge, but it's complicated because it requires plumbing. Like, I'd love to have hand washing stations in every centrum, have many places, across, all of our buildings, but that requires plumbing. And I'm not sure that that's going to be easily accomplished, but definitely want to prioritize hand washing.
So another question here is concerning if we find that we're in an online environment in the fall, because that's where we have to be by the state or the health department, of the idea of how do we get more resources out to kids? Would we create instructional kits besides a textbook or something else? Are there any thoughts of how do we package materials if we have to stay in a mode we're similar to now to provide materials, and how the planning goes for that? If we thought about those types of those options.
This actually came up in a meeting that I was in last week, and one of the department chairs asked the exact same question. I would envision that we would get to a point. We need to get, right now, students have textbooks in their hands, the majority of them. We certainly have to, Kurt mentioned earlier, talking about like an LMS or Canvas or some way of better digitizing what we do have. But I would imagine that we would have to find a way, similar to our Chromebook distribution, we'd have to find a way to get certain resources in the hands of students if we can't go back. Once we do go back, I think we need to start planning that if there is a sudden shutdown again, that we're just better equipped to get out the door and be like, okay, we've been here before. So now we need to be ready and take what we need. But I know some of the content areas that are very resource-based have asked these questions. Like, how do I teach art when kids don't have art supplies? Tech ed when they can't build things? So absolutely, I think kits would be on our mind. And I know some folks are planning that way.
And that's a great segue into the value of today's interaction with our staff. And that is that if you have thoughts or ideas and say, you know, Kurt, Jenna, Todd, this would be really helpful if, then let us know that, because I think you're in the trenches, you understand, you know, what you wished you had and didn't have. There are going to be lessons learned. There are going to be things we said, you know, if we ever have to do this again, we'll do, you know, this differently. And if we have students that choose either the hybrid option or choose, you know, online, what materials should we try to put in that whole package so they can be successful? So that's helpful. And then, of course, how do we fund it all? I mean, there's no doubt it's going to be a challenge, but you need to tell us, you know, for the bang for the buck, if you could do this, it would be worth it.
So, like I said, I will be mindful of the time here, so I don't want to keep everybody stuck at their screen for hour plus here, but great questions are coming in here. But I don't want to pass this by. We talked about it earlier, but our plans to address the overwhelming amounts of stress all of us feel, right? So our staff members, our teachers, our support staff, you know, how do we work together and keep our community support going together and dealing with the concerns that not only the staff have and parents have and students have? You know, how are we working together to realize that we're all in this crucible here together, and what supports we can provide for our staff on this new normal, everybody says. How do we deal with our stress?
So we consistently have hoped to try to communicate to everyone how much we're concerned, how much we care, encouraging you to take care of yourself. You know, that's been a consistent message that we've been trying to you know, have come across, and we hope that you're getting that message. Sometimes it's easier said than done. Sometimes I need to take my own advice, you know, and that's hard because we're so driven to, you know, get the A, do the very best in everything we do. And, you know, that's a tough one. But I'm always interested in how we can be helpful to you. You know, what else we could be doing that would make a difference. We've been trying to push some content out there from, you know, Jenny Schmidt and, you know, that office about, you know, what some possibilities or what things are available to you. But please do listen to that advice. Do take care of yourself, and be there for one another in ways that we can support each other. It's huge.
I think there's an organic piece to this too. Like when this happened in March, Bob, it was, you know, there were no options. We had to, I said to people on numerous occasions, I feel like we're building a school district, right? We have the people, but we didn't have a lot of the structures in place to make it happen. And we have the best people, and they made it happen. But that was a huge component of the stress. What's this going to look like? And now we've had some growing pains, right? Everyone, top to bottom, myself certainly included. And we'll be better next time around. And I think what we're doing right now is part of that solution to alleviate some of that stress, to get more feedback, to have more open dialogue, to hear from all stakeholders, and then try to work together to plan as best we can when those targets and field goal posts keep moving.
So I think we're, you know, at that hour now. We're going to have to wrap. But again, please give us feedback if you found this session to be helpful. You know, that kind of, you know, encouragement spurs us on to take some time just to take a break and get online with you and just, you know, give us an opportunity to share a window into our thinking. If so, let us know that, because we're extremely pressed right now with our time, but we do want to have you engaged. We want to have you involved. We want to have you, have an opportunity to have interaction with us, and tell us, hey, this would be great, or no, don't waste your time on that. Whatever it might be, that's extremely important to us. So I want to again thank everybody for taking time out of your valuable time to be online with us today. I want to encourage you to continue to give us feedback. We do have the Google form that we're going to make live pretty soon, and then the school reopening at npen.org. So take advantage of those opportunities. I know the Google form, there's a survey built in there that's very important to us. So if you could complete that survey as of today, that would be very, very helpful to us too.
And that'll be coming out following this.
All right, with that, Bob, I think we'll call it a wrap here.
All right,
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.